Imagine this: a candlelit dinner, a table set with care, soft music playing in the background. It's the perfect evening, the kind of meal made with love, the kind of night that makes you fall in love all over again. But as you savor every bite, a secret lingers in the air, thick and suffocating. A secret so horrifying, so beyond comprehension, that when the truth finally slips from her lips, your stomach twists in betrayal. The person you trusted most just fed you something no human should ever consume. It all started with love, a marriage, a promise, a dream of building a family together. Rachel Parker and her husband Kevin, newlyweds, left their quiet life in rural Mississippi and settled in California, seeking a fresh start. They dreamed of building a home, starting a family, and carving out a new life in the Sunshine State. For Rachel, having a child had always been the ultimate dream, and she convinced Kevin that a baby was the missing piece of their happiness. At first, it seemed like everything they had hoped for: a new house, a precious little girl, and a family that was finally complete. But what should have been the happiest moment in their lives slowly turned into something far more twisted. Something dark began to grow beneath the surface, unnoticed at first, but growing stronger every day. Rachel watched as Kevin doted on their baby girl, Emily, showering her with love, while slowly, in the shadows of Rachel's mind, that love began to feel like something else, something darker. It wasn't long before the love he gave to Emily turned into an obsession. The very thing Rachel had longed for, the baby she had desperately wanted, became the object of her hatred. What happened next was one of the most chilling, stomach-turning crimes you could imagine. A case of love turned to jealousy, and motherhood twisted into something monstrous. And trust me, this story only gets more disturbing from here. Welcome to True Crime Exposed, where we reveal the darkest and most unimaginable true crime cases. If you think you can handle more stories like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell because, as you'll soon see, the truth is far worse than fiction. Rachel and Kevin Parker were the kind of couple others envied. Young, in love, and building a life together, they seemed to have everything ahead of them. Rachel was full of dreams, while Kevin was steady, hardworking, and patient. They met in college, and their love for each other grew quickly. They had their challenges like any couple, but their bond was strong. Rachel had always wanted to be a mother. From the very beginning, it was something she was certain about, something she spoke about with passion. Kevin, ever the supportive husband, never doubted that they would one day have a family. He could see how much Rachel longed for it. So, when the time came, they tried for months, facing the disappointment of negative tests, but always hopeful that their moment would come. And when it finally did, the joy in their home was palpable. Rachel's pregnancy was smooth, and she embraced it fully. Kevin could hardly contain his excitement. He was there every step of the way, feeling the baby kick, talking to Emily, and envisioning their future as a family. Rachel glowed as she carried their child, and they made plans, picked out names, and dreamed of a nursery full of love. But as the due date approached, things began to shift. Rachel became more anxious, withdrawn. The joy that once lit up her face slowly flickered, giving way to something Kevin couldn't place. He chalked it up to the normal nerves that come with becoming a first-time parent. But something wasn't right. The stress of moving to California, starting fresh, was taking its toll. Kevin's job had kept him busy, and Rachel, who had always been so full of life, became quieter. She would retreat into herself, moving through their home like she wasn't really there. She didn't laugh anymore. She barely cried. It was as if the woman he had married was slowly disappearing. At first, it was just small things, comments that Rachel would make when Emily was in Kevin's arms. "You love her more than me," Rachel would whisper, and Kevin would laugh it off, not thinking much of it. "I love you both," he would say, pulling her close. But Rachel's eyes, cold and unblinking, watched him in silence. "You used to look at me the way you look at her," she would say. "You used to hold me like that." Kevin was confused, but reassured her, telling her it was just the stress of becoming parents. Still, something was off. The next time it happened, Rachel's words were sharper, filled with something Kevin couldn't ignore. "You don't look at me the way you look at her." The words stuck in his mind, but he thought they were just a passing phase. But slowly, he realized that Rachel was withdrawing, not just from him, but from everything. There were moments when Kevin would walk into a room and find Rachel standing in front of Emily's crib, staring at it as if in a trance. When he would call her name, she would blink, as though waking from a deep thought. She didn't complain about being tired, even though she was clearly exhausted. She didn't cry anymore, and she didn't laugh either. Rachel had become a stranger in her own home. Kevin tried to tell himself it was just stress, just the overwhelming nature of motherhood. He believed that once things settled down, everything would return to normal. But deep down, he had no idea how wrong he was. One morning, Rachel woke with a strange calmness in her demeanor. She moved through the house with eerie precision, like someone carrying out a plan. She bathed Emily, humming softly as she did. As she dried her off, she wrapped her tightly in a blanket and rocked her, whispering in her ear, "Mommy's got you. Everything will be okay." But her voice had no warmth. There was no love in it, just a chilling detachment. That morning, as Kevin left for work, Rachel stood in the doorway, pressing her lips to his cheek as he kissed her goodbye. "I love you," he said, not knowing that this would be the last time he would speak those words without regret. Rachel watched him leave, and when the door closed behind him, she turned, walking into the kitchen. The quiet in the house was suffocating, but she didn't notice. Her movements were deliberate, as though she was following a recipe. Every step was calculated, each movement precise. The smell of cooking began to fill the house. Rich, heavy, the kind of meal one would prepare for a special occasion. It was as if she was setting a table for royalty. When Kevin returned home that evening, he stepped into the house to find the dining room bathed in candlelight. A full meal was spread out on the table. Roast stew, something fried, and something grilled. It was perfect, a meal that spoke of love. And Rachel stood in the doorway, wearing a dress she hadn't worn in weeks, her smile soft, her eyes gleaming with something unreadable. "What's all this?" Kevin asked, eyebrows lifting in surprise. "A special dinner," Rachel said, gliding toward him. "For us. For you." She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him. For the first time in weeks, Kevin felt like his wife was back. He relaxed, and they sat down to eat. The first bite was rich, deeply seasoned, amazing, as Kevin would say. He ate with relish, savoring each bite, the warmth of the meal settling into his stomach. But something felt off. There was an edge to Rachel's smile. Her eyes were focused on him, but not in the way he remembered. Her smile seemed to linger just a little too long. And then, the meal, as delicious as it was, felt different. Kevin couldn't put his finger on it, but something was wrong. He took another bite, and that's when he realized. He hadn't heard Emily at all that evening. His stomach twisted. He looked up at Rachel. "Where's the baby?" he asked, his voice tight with worry. Rachel's smile widened, and she tilted her head slightly, her fingers still tracing his hand. "You like the food?" she asked, her voice soft. Kevin's heart raced as he swallowed hard. "Tiana, where's Emily?" Rachel's grip on his hand tightened. She leaned forward, her voice soft and almost loving. "She's in your mouth, Kevin." The world stopped. Kevin froze, his heart pounding in his chest. His fork dropped to the plate with a loud clatter. His stomach churned, and suddenly, everything in the room felt distant and unreal. His mind couldn't comprehend what he had just heard. What? His voice was hoarse. His body felt numb as the truth slowly began to settle in. Rachel's smile didn't waver. "You wanted to know where she was, didn't you? Now we truly are a family." Kevin's breath caught in his throat as he stumbled backward, his hands clutching at his throat, feeling as if he was choking on the realization. His wife had just done the unthinkable. Kevin stumbled backward, gasping for air, his hands clawing at his throat as the horrific realization settled over him. His mind refused to process the words, but the truth was undeniable. His wife, the woman he had loved, the mother of their child, had just fed him their baby. Emily was gone, and worse, she had turned the little girl they had both adored into a meal. Tiana's smile didn't falter as Kevin continued to tremble in front of her. She moved closer to him, as if she were comforting him, but there was no comfort in her presence. Her eyes were cold, distant. "You always said we should be a family," she murmured softly, her voice almost sweet. "Now we truly are." Kevin's entire world shattered. His stomach turned violently, his mind spinning as the horror of what had just transpired slammed into him like a freight train. His baby, his innocent child, reduced to this unspeakable fate. He stumbled backward, his legs giving out from beneath him, and he collapsed to the ground. His vision blurred, his body trembling with every breath. His hands, covered in sweat, shook uncontrollably as he looked around the kitchen, unable to comprehend the scene before him. The table was set perfectly, the plates full, the food rich and inviting. But all he could see now was the horror in front of him, his daughter, cooked and served to him, and his wife standing there as if nothing had happened. "No!" Kevin screamed, his voice raw, filled with the desperation and grief that tore through his chest. "What have you done? What have you done to our baby?" Tiana didn't flinch. She stood there, watching him fall apart with a detached expression, her cold smile still in place. The meal she had prepared, the action she had taken, were nothing more than a sick display of control, a twisted assertion of dominance over the man she felt had rejected her. Emily, once the center of their world, had become nothing more than a pawn in a game Rachel had been playing for far too long. "Rachel," Kevin whispered, his voice breaking as he reached for her, as if seeking some kind of explanation, some last shred of humanity in the woman who had once been the love of his life. "Tell me this isn't real. Please, tell me you didn't." But Tiana's eyes held no remorse, no compassion. She stepped away from him, still smiling. "I gave you what you wanted, Kevin. You never loved me more than her, but now, you'll never love her more than me again." Kevin's mind swirled in confusion, his heart pounding painfully against his ribcage. How could this be real? How could his wife, the woman he had trusted, the mother of their child, have done this? The love they once shared felt so distant now, like it had never existed in the first place. All he could see was the horrifying image of his baby girl, Emily, consumed by his own body. Kevin staggered to his feet, reaching for his phone, his hands shaking so violently that it was a miracle he could dial the number. His words came out in broken gasps, desperation lacing every syllable as he cried out for help. 911, please, he pleaded, his voice strained. "Help me, my baby is gone. My wife, she cooked her. She's in the food. Please, please help me." The operator's voice on the other end of the line was calm, but filled with urgency, trying to piece together the details as Kevin's frantic sobs echoed through the phone. The seconds felt like hours. Kevin's breath hitched as he stumbled backward, his stomach still lurching as the truth remained fixed in his mind. Tiana's words repeated in his ears, echoing in the silence that surrounded him. "She's in your mouth." When the police arrived, the chaos was only beginning. But even they couldn't prepare for the horrors they were about to uncover. Officers rushed in, but their shock was palpable the moment they saw Kevin, pale, drenched in sweat, trembling with grief. He barely registered their presence, his eyes vacant, his body shaking with the kind of terror that no one could truly understand unless they had lived through it themselves. Detective Avery Price, the lead investigator, stepped forward, his eyes scanning the room as he tried to make sense of the disarray. His gaze fell on the dinner table, the carefully prepared spread of food that had, just hours ago, seemed like a loving gesture. The warm aroma still filled the air, mingling with the undeniable sense of dread. Price's gaze narrowed as he noticed the detail of the meal, the perfectly roasted meats, the glistening sauces, the fragrant sides. But something about it didn't sit right. "Sir," Detective Price said gently, crouching next to Kevin. "What happened here? Where's your child?" His voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of disbelief, like he could already sense something terrible was unfolding. Kevin could barely answer. His hands trembled as he weakly pointed toward the table, his voice barely a whisper. "She's in the food. My baby, she's in the food." His words were incoherent, almost impossible to comprehend, but the officer's eyes were sharp, and they quickly turned to the table. Officer Emily Ryan stepped forward cautiously, taking in the scene with grim determination. She began inspecting the plates, her eyes scanning every dish with meticulous care. She paused, her breath catching in her throat as she reached the centerpiece, the main course. She bent down, peering closely at the food. There in the center of the dish was a piece of flesh. It was unmistakable, human flesh. A chill ran down Officer Ryan's spine as she stepped back, her hands trembling. "Detective," she called out, her voice shaking slightly. "We need immediate backup. We need forensics. I think we've got a homicide on our hands." The officers exchanged grim looks. They knew the situation had just escalated to something much worse than a domestic dispute or a case of postpartum stress. This was murder. Unspeakable, horrific, and beyond anything they had ever imagined. Tiana stood in the corner, watching it all unfold. Her demeanor remained eerily calm. She seemed almost satisfied. Detective Price approached her, his voice firm as he spoke, trying to gain some kind of reaction. "Ma'am, we need to ask you some questions," he said, stepping closer. Tiana smiled sweetly at him, her face a mask of innocence. "What's the problem?" she asked, her tone almost too sweet. "I made a meal for my husband. Is there something wrong with that?" Her words, spoken so casually, hit the officers like a slap to the face. There was no panic in her voice, no regret in her eyes. It was as if she had done nothing wrong. The arrest was swift. Tiana showed no resistance as she was taken into custody, her smile never faltering. It was as if the events of the night, her heinous crime, had meant nothing to her. But the trial that followed would reveal more than anyone could have anticipated. It wasn't just the brutality of the crime that shocked the nation. It was the chilling calmness with which Tiana carried out her plan. In court, the defense tried to argue that Rachel had been suffering from postpartum psychosis, a mental health condition that had twisted her reality and pushed her to commit an act she couldn't fully understand. The defense painted her as a woman who had been overwhelmed by motherhood, a woman whose mind had cracked under the pressure of raising a child. They argued that the murder was a result of a temporary break from reality, a psychotic episode that had clouded her judgment. But the prosecution didn't buy it. They argued that what Tiana had done was calculated, deliberate. The way she had prepared the meal, the way she had waited until Kevin was seated at the table, savoring every bite, showed a level of control and planning that couldn't be explained by simple psychosis. For Kevin, every day was a battle with the grief that consumed him. Sitting in the courtroom, hearing the details of that fateful night again and again, was almost too much to bear. His love for Emily, the joy he had felt as a new father, now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by the horror of what had happened. As the trial reached its conclusion, Tiana's fate was sealed. She was found guilty of first-degree murder. The jury concluded that her actions had been premeditated and that her mind, though disturbed, had remained clear when she made the decision to end her child's life. The judge sentenced Tiana to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The gavel's echo reverberated through the courtroom, finalizing a fate that, in many ways, had already been sealed by her actions. It was a verdict that seemed fitting for the unimaginable crime she had committed, a crime that had not only stolen an innocent life, but had also destroyed a family in ways no one could ever fully comprehend. For Kevin, however, the verdict brought little relief. It did not erase the overwhelming weight of the grief that had consumed him since that horrifying night. The courtroom buzzed around him, but inside, Kevin felt nothing but hollow silence. The man he had been, the father, the husband, the man who had once trusted the woman he loved, was no more. Tiana, the woman he had promised to build a life with, was now a stranger, a person whose actions defied everything he thought he knew about love and family. The pain of losing Emily, his sweet, precious daughter, was something that no verdict, no punishment could ever soothe. The image of her tiny face, the sound of her first laugh, the feel of her little hands clutching his finger, those memories had now become suffocating reminders of everything he had lost. The warmth of his daughter's embrace was now replaced with the icy grip of betrayal. Kevin tried to focus on the sentencing, to hold on to the hope that justice had been served, but the reality kept crashing down on him. The memories of that night, the smell of the food, rich and inviting, as he unknowingly consumed the very thing that had once been his daughter, haunted him relentlessly. Every bite he took, every moment of blissful ignorance, replayed in his mind like a nightmare that would never end. And Tiana's cold words echoed over and over, like a refrain he couldn't shake. "She's in your mouth," she had whispered, her voice devoid of any remorse, any humanity. Those words cut deeper than any knife ever could, embedding themselves in Kevin's mind, leaving him with a void that no amount of time could ever fill. He had not just lost his daughter. He had lost his sense of reality, his trust in his own perceptions, his very identity. In the days that followed the trial, Kevin's world felt like it was slipping away from him. He no longer found comfort in the familiar things that once brought him peace. The house they had shared, the place where they had planned their future, was now a prison. Every corner seemed to whisper reminders of the life that had been torn apart. He couldn't escape the shadow of that fateful night, the night when his wife. The love he had once felt for her had been poisoned by the horrific actions she had carried out. The community, too, was left in shock. The Parker family had been the epitome of normalcy, of what people aspire to have. Yet behind closed doors, a monster had lurked. The shocking realization that such horror could exist within the walls of a home that appeared so ordinary left everyone questioning what lies beneath the surface of their own lives. People whispered, tried to make sense of it, but no one could. The questions lingered. What drove Tiana to this point? What had happened inside her mind, behind that serene smile, to make her capable of such a heinous act? The case of Tiana Parker became one of the darkest and most incomprehensible true crime stories to ever reach the public eye. A once loving mother, who had cradled her child with warmth and devotion, had turned into something monstrous, something unrecognizable. The devastating combination of unchecked mental illness, jealousy, and rage had led to a horrific act that no one could have foreseen. Tiana's mind had unraveled in ways no one, least of all Kevin, could have predicted. The woman who had once filled their home with laughter and dreams was now a shell of that person, driven to madness by feelings of rejection and an obsessive jealousy that consumed her. The tragedy of it all lay in the fact that Tiana wasn't the victim here. She had chosen to become the perpetrator. She had made a deliberate choice to take her daughter's life. And in doing so, she destroyed not just Emily, but everything that had once been good in her own life. What was left in the wake of such a tragedy? A grieving father, a broken family, a community forever changed. Kevin's life would never be the same. The image of Emily, so innocent and full of potential, would forever be burned into his memory, but the love he had for Tiana, once all-encompassing, had turned to ashes. There was no going back, no healing from the horrors of that night. If this case left you shocked, you're not alone. This is the kind of tragedy that exposes the darkness lurking beneath the facades of our everyday lives. It's a painful reminder that sometimes the most horrifying acts come from those we trust the most, those we least expect. These are the kinds of stories that should never be forgotten, stories that remind us how fragile the human mind can be when it's consumed by unchecked emotions, untreated mental illness, and overwhelming jealousy. The darkness that lies just beneath the surface can manifest in ways that defy all logic and reason. If you found this case chilling, make sure to subscribe to True Crime Insider for more real-life stories that reveal the monsters hiding in plain sight. Join us as we continue to expose the darkest corners of humanity, stories that you'll never forget, stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Stay tuned, and don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a terrifying new episode.